The history of the Second World War has always been framed by what was allowed to surface, by what victors permitted to be written into textbooks, and by what was judged safe for public memory. Yet behind every official record, in every dusty cabinet of forgotten ministries, and in every sealed envelope marked top secret, lies another history, a darker, forbidden ledger that tells of plans never executed, agreements never signed in daylight, and betrayals whispered only in coded telegrams. These are the files that were buried so deep, they were never meant to see the light of day. Documents left behind like fingerprints of men who understood that wars are not only fought with tanks, planes and soldiers, but with silence, deception, and carefully crafted omissions. The silence is deliberate, the omissions are calculated, and the world, unknowingly, has lived in the shadow of these buried decisions for decades. Within these secret files, we encounter treaties drafted in smoke-filled rooms that could have toppled empires without firing a single shot. We trace submarines carrying poisons across oceans, their wreckage still leaking toxins into the sea. We hear the echo of betrayed uprisings, silenced not by enemy bullets, but by the cynical calculations of supposed allies. And we discover the sanitized identities of men who, in one hand, carried the blood of thousands, and in the other, the designs for rockets that would launch humanity into space. This is not history as written, but history as it was concealed. The war behind the war, the archive that was never meant to be opened. Chapter 1. The Silent Treaty of Madrid, 1940. The year was 1940, and Europe lay under the shadow of the swastika. France had fallen in a mere 6 weeks, its armies broken and humiliated, its capital paraded through by German troops. Britain stood alone across the Channel, bracing for invasion, its lifeline dependent on sea lanes that stretched through the Mediterranean. To the south, the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco sat in Madrid, ruler of a nation shattered by civil war, his hands still stained with the blood of countrymen. Though Spain declared neutrality, whispers from the corridors of the Caudillo's palace told a different story. Hidden in files labeled Concordia Azul within the Spanish General Staff archives, lies evidence of an agreement drafted in secret with Nazi Germany, a treaty that, had it been executed, would have reshaped the map of Europe. The document's provisions were stark. In exchange for German promises of grain, oil, and military equipment, Franco granted the Reich contingency rights to Iberian railways and roadways. Should Hitler command it, German panzer divisions could have marched across Spanish soil, advancing toward Gibraltar, the narrow fortress that controlled the gateway to the Mediterranean. For Hitler, seizing Gibraltar would strangle British naval power, cutting off access to Suez and threatening the empire's eastern lifelines. For Franco, it was a gamble to keep Spain officially neutral, while quietly aligning himself with the might of the Third Reich. The treaty remained unsigned in public view, but German envoys carried it back to Berlin, stamped with Madrid's seal of compliance. British intelligence became aware of the plot in early 1941. MI6's Iberian desk, operating under the guise of diplomats in Lisbon, intercepted coded cables between Madrid and Berlin. Station X at Bletchley Park worked tirelessly to decrypt them, revealing fragments of the plan. The reports were forwarded to Churchill's War Cabinet, marked Most Secret. Yet, to prevent Spain from being driven fully into the Axis camp, Churchill ordered that the intelligence remain concealed from the public, and even from many within his own government. What emerged was a quiet policy of appeasement toward Franco, one the British public would never be told about. In the shadows, countermeasures were prepared. The British military launched Operation Tracer, a covert plan to seal a 6-man garrison within the Rock of Gibraltar itself. Their mission was to live underground, hidden in chambers carved from stone, undetected even if the fortress fell to German forces. From their concealed outpost, they would broadcast intelligence on Axis movements for as long as their rations allowed, perhaps years. It was a desperate insurance policy against the possibility that the silent treaty would come to life. Spanish Civil War veterans also became part of the equation. Hundreds of Franco's loyalists, many battle-hardened from fighting in the Blue Division, were quietly recruited into the Waffen-SS. Under false designations, they served in occupied territories, particularly on the Eastern Front, giving Hitler the men he needed while preserving Spain's facade of neutrality. These movements were deliberately hidden, their paperwork obscured under false unit names. German records in Gestapo file know. UN-17 confirmed the arrangement, though they were buried deep within archives that remained sealed until decades later. The Soviet Union, though not blind to espionage, uncovered the existence of the treaty through its NKVD networks in Madrid. Declassified files from Moscow reveal reports sent directly to Stalin in 1941, describing the potential German seizure of Gibraltar via Spanish territory. Stalin held this knowledge close, using it later as leverage in his dealings with Churchill during the post-war conferences. To the Soviets, it was another reminder that Britain's wartime diplomacy was riddled with half-truths and secret bargains. What is chilling is not merely that such a treaty existed, but how close it came to being enacted. In late 1940, Hitler summoned Franco to a meeting at Hendaye, on the French-Spanish border. The Führer demanded Spain's entry into the war. Franco resisted, citing Spain's exhaustion and economic ruin after the Civil War. He bargained skillfully, requesting colonial territories in Africa in exchange for cooperation, knowing full well Hitler could not meet these demands without angering Vichy France. The meeting ended in stalemate, but the secret treaty remained in Berlin's possession, a tool to be used at any moment should Spain waver. Churchill later described Hitler's frustration with Franco as an obstinate mule, but the truth, hidden within declassified Foreign Office papers, tells another story. Britain's clandestine payments to Spanish generals, the quiet shipments of wheat and fuel to Madrid, were part of a calculated strategy to keep Spain from activating the treaty. It was a battle fought not with bullets, but with food, oil, and gold. By 1942, the war's momentum shifted. Operation Torch brought American troops into North Africa, and the danger of Spain opening its doors to the Wehrmacht diminished. Yet the silent Treaty of Madrid remained locked away, an artifact of what could have been. Had German divisions marched south, had Gibraltar fallen, the Mediterranean might have been closed, isolating British forces and altering the entire course of the war. It was a dagger aimed at Britain's throat, concealed in a drawer of Madrid's palace, never drawn, but always threatening. For decades, the Spanish government denied the existence of such an agreement. It was only after the fall of Franco's regime that fragments of the Concordia Azul files were unearthed. Historians who examined them were struck not only by their content, but by their deliberate concealment. Margins were scorched, signatures partially erased, and references redacted, as though someone had attempted to destroy the record but lost their nerve. The British, too, remained silent. Their own files marked closed until 2050, a delay designed to outlive the generation that lived through it. The silent Treaty of Madrid is a reminder of how fragile neutrality can be, and how close history came to being rewritten. Behind the official narrative of Spain as a non-belligerent power lies a truth far more sinister, that neutrality was little more than a mask, and that the fate of Gibraltar, the Mediterranean, and perhaps the war itself hung on a piece of paper signed in the shadows, hidden away in a drawer where the world was never meant to look. Chapter 2. The Ghost Convoy of U-864. In early 1944, as the Third Reich fought desperately on two collapsing fronts, its high command sought to tip the balance of war in the Pacific. Imperial Japan, though still powerful, was being strangled by American naval superiority. German engineers had developed technologies far in advance of Japan's own capabilities. Jet turbines, advanced radar, and the closely guarded secrets of nerve agents. The Reich's leadership resolved to share this knowledge, sending it across oceans in a mission so secret it was hidden under the codename Operation Caesar. At its center was U-864, a Type 9 submarine assigned the task of carrying one of the most dangerous cargoes ever loaded onto a vessel in wartime. The manifest was chilling. Packed into the steel belly of U-864 were dismantled Messerschmitt jet engine parts, blueprints for advanced aircraft designs, and more than 1,800 steel flasks filled with liquid mercury. Mercury was vital for the production of detonators and precision instruments, materials Japan's war industry desperately needed. Alongside the metals and machinery were packets of documents detailing German advances in chemical warfare, specifically nerve agents like tabun, developments so devastating that, had they reached Japan, they might have altered the final stages of the Pacific War. At the time, American forces were preparing for island-hopping campaigns that brought them ever closer to the Japanese mainland. If Japan had acquired both the technology and the means for large-scale chemical warfare, the human cost would have been catastrophic. U-864 departed Kiel in December 1944 under the command of Korvettenkapitan Ralph Reimar Wolfram. The mission was perilous from the outset. Allied bombers harassed German ports relentlessly, and submarine movements were closely monitored by intelligence intercepts. Yet the Kriegsmarine pressed forward, knowing that this single delivery could alter the war's trajectory in the east. The submarine's orders were to travel northward, past occupied Norway, before slipping into the North Atlantic and making the long, stealthy passage to Japanese-controlled waters. What the Germans did not know was that their secret had already been compromised. Bletchley Park, Britain's code-breaking headquarters, had intercepted radio messages tied to Operation Caesar. Though fragments and incomplete, the decrypts indicated that a submarine was being loaded with hazardous cargo destined for Asia. The information was relayed to the Admiralty, where the Royal Navy scrambled to prepare a countermeasure. The decision was made to dispatch HMS Venturer, a V-class submarine under the command of Lieutenant James Launders, a man already known for his aggressive patrols and precision in underwater combat. Venturer was sent to Norwegian waters in early 1945, tasked with locating the German vessel. Intelligence provided general coordinates, but the sea was vast and hostile. The North Sea in winter was unforgiving, its waters churning with ice and storm, its skies often blanketed in grey clouds. Patrols relied on instinct as much as charts. For days, Launders and his crew hunted, listening through hydrophones for the faintest hint of a diesel engine or propeller churn beneath the waves. On February 9, 1945, off the coast of Fedje, Norway, Venturer detected an unusual pattern. Intermittent engine noises, uneven and inconsistent, as if a vessel were limping forward. It was U-864. The German submarine was already suffering mechanical problems, its engine vibrating from defects that slowed its progress. Launders faced a decision unlike any other: how to engage a submerged target with another submerged vessel. No such duel had ever been fought in naval history. For over 3 hours, Launders tracked the German submarine, calculating its movements while remaining undetected. U-864, unaware of the British predator, maneuvered erratically, perhaps attempting to shake off pursuit, perhaps due to its failing engines. Launders plotted firing solutions manually, anticipating where the German commander might steer. At 12:12 hours, Venturer fired a spread of 4 torpedoes into the depths, one after another. Explosions thundered below, and sonar detected the breakup of a hull. U-864 had been struck and torn apart. Its toxic cargo, its jet parts, and its secrets sank into the cold, dark seabed, entombed with its crew. The sinking of U-864 was recorded as a triumph of British naval ingenuity, but the details of its mission remained classified for decades. Public announcements at the time mentioned only another German submarine destroyed, another small victory in the closing months of war. The fact that its cargo included nearly 70 tons of mercury was never disclosed, not to the public, not even to many within military circles. The wreck lay at a depth of 150 meters, undisturbed, its secret resting beneath the waves. Yet the sea does not keep secrets forever. In the years that followed, fishermen near Fedje reported anomalies, strange slicks on the surface, odd discolorations, and unexplained deaths of fish. Norwegian authorities eventually confirmed the presence of mercury seeping from corroded containers aboard the wreck. By the early 21st century, U-864 was no longer simply a relic of war. It had become an ecological time bomb. Norwegian and NATO officials debated how to contain the threat, whether to raise the wreck, risking rupture, or to encase it beneath layers of sand and concrete. The operation, shrouded in secrecy, highlighted the lingering danger of a mission launched more than half a century earlier. Declassified German files reveal the broader context. Operation Caesar was part of a larger plan to sustain the Axis alliance by sharing technologies as the Reich faltered. Other submarines were tasked with carrying blueprints, weapons, even uranium oxide for Japan's nuclear ambitions. Some reached their destinations, others were intercepted or sunk. U-864 was unique in the scale and danger of its cargo. It represented a direct line of technological transfer that, had it succeeded, could have prolonged the Pacific conflict by years and multiplied its casualties beyond comprehension. Lieutenant Launders was decorated for his unprecedented victory, though he rarely spoke publicly about the engagement. In naval circles, the sinking was studied as a tactical masterpiece. Yet the reason behind the pursuit, the deadly cargo, remained hidden. Only when NATO's environmental surveys of the wreck began did the true nature of U-864's mission emerge. Even then, Official statements downplayed the significance, focusing on ecological risk rather than the wartime intent. The legacy of U-864 is a story of silence layered upon silence. It is the story of a submarine sent across oceans not to fight, but to deliver the tools of mass destruction. It is the story of a duel fought blind in the depths, where one commander made decisions that unknowingly prevented a nightmare from reaching the Pacific theater. And it is the story of a wreck that continues to poison the sea, a reminder that some wars do not end when treaties are signed. They persist in the water, in the soil, in the classified files marked "Destroy after reading." U-864 remains on the seabed off Fedje, a ghost convoy whose mission failed, but whose danger has never truly disappeared. Chapter 3: Stalin's Disavowed Operation in Warsaw. In August 1944, as German armies reeled under pressure from the Red Army's summer offensive, the city of Warsaw erupted into defiance. The Polish Home Army, known as Armia Krajowa, launched the Warsaw Uprising under the codename Operation Tempest. They believed liberation was at hand. Soviet forces under Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky had pushed across the Vistula, stopping just east of the city. To the Poles, the timing seemed perfect. An armed revolt would seize the capital, present it to the Red Army as a free city, and secure independence for Poland in the post-war order. But what they could not see, hidden within encrypted cables and files marked with the red stamp of the NKVD, was that Stalin had already chosen Warsaw's fate. Declassified documents from Soviet military archives, including reports from the GRU, confirm that Stalin's orders to Rokossovsky were explicit. The Red Army was not to intervene in Warsaw. Instead, it would halt on the Vistula's banks, adopting a posture of operational pause. The official explanation given to Western allies was logistical exhaustion, a need to regroup after rapid advances. But telegrams exchanged between Moscow and frontline commanders reveal another calculation. Stalin viewed the Polish resistance not as allies, but as political obstacles, nationalists loyal to the exiled government in London rather than to Moscow. By allowing the Germans to annihilate them, the Kremlin would clear the path for a Soviet-controlled Poland. The uprising began on August 1st. Nearly 40,000 poorly armed fighters, many teenagers, rose against the German garrison. They captured key districts, raised the Polish flag, and fought with captured weapons, Molotov cocktails, and homemade grenades. Civilians dug trenches and built barricades, turning Warsaw into a battlefield. At first, hope ran high. Messages were sent to London, calling for Allied assistance, believing that the Soviets, so close on the horizon, would soon join the battle. Instead, silence came from the east. The German response was merciless. Heinrich Himmler ordered that Warsaw be wiped from the map, its population exterminated. SS units under Oskar Dirlewanger, a brigade notorious for its brutality, were unleashed upon the city. Thousands of civilians were massacred in reprisal killings. Entire neighborhoods were burned block by block. The uprising's fighters, outgunned and undersupplied, struggled to hold their positions as the German war machine ground down their resistance. From across the river, Soviet troops could see the flames, hear the artillery, and even intercept Polish radio pleas. Yet they did not move. British intelligence soon grasped the truth. Ambassador Avril Harriman, in cables sent from Moscow, described the Soviet inaction as calculated liquidation under passive observance. Requests were made for American and British aircraft to airdrop supplies. Churchill pressed Stalin to permit Allied planes to land on Soviet airfields after making deliveries, but the Kremlin refused. Without Soviet bases, Allied planes had to fly from Italy, a journey so long that few could carry meaningful loads. Many aircraft never returned, shot down by German anti-aircraft fire. Those that succeeded often saw their supplies fall into German hands. The uprising dragged on for 63 days. The Home Army fought valiantly, but its ammunition dwindled. By September, exhaustion, starvation, and relentless bombardment had reduced Warsaw to ruins. Civilians huddled in basements, surrounded by corpses and rubble, their city consumed by fire. Still, the Red Army did not cross. Stalin gave only token support to a small group of Polish communists, ensuring that his chosen faction would survive to claim authority once the Germans withdrew. To the fighters of Armia Krajowa, the silence from the east was louder than the thunder of German artillery. When the uprising was finally crushed in October, the toll was staggering. More than 200,000 civilians had perished. The surviving fighters were sent to camps. The city itself was systematically demolished by German engineers, leaving behind a skeletal ruin. Only then, in January 1945, did Soviet forces march into Warsaw. By then, nothing remained of the city's leadership, its resistance, or its independence. Stalin's objective had been achieved without firing a shot. The Polish nationalist movement had been bled to death by the Germans, leaving only Soviet-backed communists to inherit the ashes. Soviet histories later described the tragedy as the result of military necessity. They claimed the Red Army had exhausted its supplies, its troops too strained to launch an immediate offensive. Western historians for years repeated this narrative, for the official files of the Allies revealed little else. But the declassified cables, the GRU reports, and the intercepted NKVD directives expose a darker reality. The delay was intentional, a betrayal by design. Stalin had used Hitler's SS as a tool of political cleansing, allowing his enemy to do the work of eliminating rivals. The betrayal scarred Poland for generations. Survivors of the Home Army were hunted down after the war, branded enemies of the state by the new communist regime. Many were imprisoned, executed, or forced into exile. Their sacrifice, once celebrated in whispers, was erased from official memory. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union did the full scope of the documents come to light. Orders signed in Moscow, reports sent from the Vistula, and telegrams between Stalin and his commanders reveal the deliberate abandonment of Warsaw's resistance. What the Soviets once called a tragic accident of war was, in fact, a cold act of political engineering. The Warsaw Uprising remains a haunting testament to how wars are fought not only on battlefields, but in the shadows of political strategy. It is the story of a people who rose for freedom, believing help was near, only to be betrayed by those who claimed to fight for liberation. It is the story of silence weaponized as surely as bullets, a silence written into orders, sealed in archives, and only revealed when the locks on history's cabinets finally broke. In the flames of Warsaw, one sees not just the cruelty of the occupier, but the calculated indifference of an ally who chose power over principle, leaving a capital to die in the hope that a new Poland would be born in chains. Chapter 4. The Disappearance of Operation Paperclip Files. In May 1945, as the Third Reich crumbled and Allied forces swept through the ruins of Hitler's empire, victory was accompanied by a scramble not for territory but for mines. Nazi Germany had built rockets that touched the edge of space, aircraft that broke the sound barrier, and weapons that seemed like science fiction. The Allies knew that whoever secured these scientists would gain an advantage not just in the war's final days, but in the wars yet to come. Thus began Operation Paperclip, a secret American project that sought to transfer German scientists, engineers, and physicians into the United States. It would become one of the most controversial and hidden legacies of World War II. For buried within its files are not just names, but erasures, dossiers destroyed, identities altered and pasts wiped clean, leaving behind ghosts in the records of justice. The initial directive was clear. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency, was tasked with identifying German specialists of military value. Under the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, lists were drawn of men who could contribute to rocketry, aviation, chemical warfare, and medicine. Among the most prized were Werner von Braun and his team from Peenemünde, architects of the V2 rocket that had rained destruction on London. Yet alongside men like von Braun were others whose work was not merely technical, but criminal. SS physician Dr. Kurt Blome, for example, had overseen biological warfare experiments, while Arthur Rudolph was implicated in the use of slave labor at the Mittelwerk facility, where thousands of prisoners from Dora Mittelbau perished, constructing V2 rockets under appalling conditions. Ordinarily, such men would have faced charges at Nuremberg. Indeed, early drafts of the prosecution lists included their names. But here the record blurs. Entire case files from the OSS and the US Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, disappeared. 23 dossiers in particular, later referenced only in passing cables marked ultra-black, were either destroyed or reclassified. British intelligence, upon reviewing captured German documents, raised alarm over the inclusion of individuals connected to human experimentation. Yet when the Nuremberg trials convened, their names were absent. Someone somewhere had intervened. In the fog of bureaucratic paperwork, the crimes of these men vanished, replaced by sanitized resumes fit for recruitment. The method was systematic. Dossiers were edited to remove incriminating evidence, reworded to describe scientists as apolitical or reluctant participants. Nazi Party memberships were quietly omitted, SS ranks excised, and the word slave replaced with laborer. When confronted, American officials argued that the Soviet Union was already recruiting German scientists, and that to leave these men behind would be to hand Stalin an advantage. It was the logic of pragmatism. Justice could wait, but technology could not. The war was over, but the Cold War had already begun. In the Soviet zone, parallel operations were underway. NKVD units rounded up their own targets, transporting them east to secret facilities. Among them were rocket specialists and aeronautical engineers who contributed to Moscow's early missile programs. Propaganda broadcasts accused the United States of harboring Nazi war criminals, citing names like Blome and Rudolph. At the time, Washington dismissed these claims as fabrications, Cold War lies designed to sow division. Yet buried in the National Archives are memoranda from the JIOA acknowledging the destruction of incriminating records. The Soviets, it turned out, had been telling a half-truth, lies built upon real omissions. The long-term consequences of Paperclip were immense. Werner von Braun went on to design the Saturn V rocket, carrying astronauts to the moon. Arthur Rudolph became project director for the same program, his past hidden, until journalists uncovered his wartime record in the 1980s. Kurt Blome, though indicted for war crimes, was acquitted in part because critical evidence had vanished. Afterward, he was quietly consulted by American biological warfare programs. The line between criminal and contributor blurred, drawn not by morality, but by necessity. To this day, many of the Paperclip files remain incomplete. Pages are missing, signatures redacted, and chains of custody broken. Some files contain handwritten notes reading "removed by authority of JIOA." Others have entire sections blacked out, the reasons classified. Inquiries by historians have often been met with denials or delayed releases, the official explanation being that disclosure would compromise national security. The truth is simpler. To expose the full roster of Paperclip scientists would be to admit that the post-war order was built, in part, on a foundation of suppressed justice. British archives provide fragments that fill some of the gaps. Cables from MI6's Scientific Intelligence section complain that American counterparts were obstructing the transfer of German files. One note from 1946 laments the sanitization of personnel records and warns that the erasure of criminal association may compromise future accountability. These warnings were ignored. The United States, determined to maintain supremacy in rocketry and bioweapons, pressed forward, erasing the stains of history to paint a cleaner picture. The disappearance of Operation Paperclip files represents more than a bureaucratic oversight. It is a deliberate act of historical amnesia. Men who might have stood in the dock at Nuremberg instead stood in laboratories at White Sands and Huntsville, their crimes obscured by the glow of rocket flames and the race to the stars. The families of concentration camp victims never saw their tormentors face justice. Instead, they saw their names appear in scientific journals, their photographs taken at NASA facilities, their legacies celebrated in documentaries that never mentioned the word Dora. What remains is an unresolved ledger, a debt of truth owed, but never paid. The erased files are not just missing documents. They are missing testimonies, missing verdicts, missing lines in the story of a war that promised accountability, but delivered compromise. They remind us that the line between ally and adversary, between liberator and accomplice, can vanish in the smoke of classified rooms. And they leave us with a haunting question. How much of what we celebrate as progress was built not on triumph, but on silence, omissions, and the careful disappearance of paper that was never meant to survive? The hidden files of the Second World War are not merely yellowed papers stored in locked cabinets. They are living shadows that shape the present. They speak of pacts signed in secret, of alliances forged not by trust but by calculation, of betrayals where silence proved more lethal than bullets. They reveal submarines that carried poison through the oceans, cities abandoned to their deaths by supposed liberators, and scientists who walked free because their knowledge was judged more valuable than justice. Each document withheld, each dossier erased, was a deliberate act of control, an attempt to sculpt memory as carefully as borders were redrawn in 1945. The danger of these buried truths is not only what they reveal about the past, but what they imply about the future. If nations could bargain away justice, could erase crimes with the stroke of a pen, then the wars we believe we understand are only fragments of the wars that were truly fought. What other files remain hidden, sealed until years yet to come? What other decisions, signed in silence, continue to haunt the architecture of our world? The closing of one archive is never the end. It is the beginning of questions that echo through time. The shadows of Madrid, of Fege, of Warsaw, and of Huntsville remind us that the past was never meant to sleep. It was meant to be buried, and burial is never the same as peace.